Hi everyone, it's Emma, and today I would like to talk about Heartless by Marissa Meyer. Heartless is a Alice in Wonderland retelling focused on the Queen of Hearts. Marissa Meyer also wrote The Lunar Chronicles, which I have not read, although I started Cinder, but I couldn't really get into it. I decided to read this despite the fact that I couldn't get into Cinder because I want to retry The Lunar Chronicles, but it's always hard to pick up a book again after you gave up on it. This sounded so interesting, and the cover is just like beautiful enough to buy it on its own. This is the naked cover, and it's so gorgeous. I always love these stories that are kind of focused on the villain or the anti-heroes, and I really love the backstories to those type of characters. And since the Queen of Hearts is such a character that I don't even think about, I mean, she's just evil, and you assume that that's the way she always was. I was really interested to read this because I knew that it was her backstory. If the lighting is a little bit off today, it's because it is rainy and I can't do anything about it, but hopefully it looks okay. You might not even notice, which is why I don't have my lights that I usually have here. I have my stars because the lights were like really fuzzy and weird. A little note before I get into this book talk. I mentioned a couple times on my channel that I would be making a series overview for the Mara Dyer trilogy, and obviously that has not happened, and I would like to explain why. It took a really long time for me to just film that video, and then I finally filmed it, and something went wrong with the sound. It had taken me so long and so much work to get that video done that I just decided it wasn't meant to be, and I just scrapped it and decided to do Heartless instead. So hopefully you guys weren't waiting for that or anything. I really enjoyed this book. I had a little bit of the same experience that I did with Cinder, but I pushed through it, and I'm glad that I did. In Heartless, we follow this girl, Kath, who we know grows up to be the Red Queen, but at this point she's just a young girl, and she's the daughter of a marquess, which basically means that she's nobility, so there are certain expectations for her life. Kath does not necessarily want the same things that her parents does. In fact, she really doesn't want those things. She loves to bake, and she wants to open her own bakery. Meanwhile, she's also a favorite of the king, and they're expecting him to court her and maybe propose to her, and Kath also does not want that either. She doesn't want to be a queen, she just wants to open this bakery. So Kath is a favorite of the king, and then one day at a ball she meets this mysterious man who is the new court jester, and immediately she kind of is attracted to him like she's never been to any other man. She becomes very Twitter-pated, and everything just kind of spirals out from there. One of the things that really stood out to me about this book is that because we know it's about the Queen of Hearts, you assume from the beginning something tragic is going to happen because we meet this girl Kath, and although she's kind of naive and a little bit self-centered, she's kind of sweet. She doesn't seem like the type to want to kill everyone. So you assume that something tragic happens to her to turn her into the Red Queen. This whole time, there's this feeling of like impending doom, and I found that really interesting and like very compelling, and it kept me reading because I was so nervous. I grew to love these characters and I didn't want anything bad to happen to them, and yet you kind of expect it to. So I found that really interesting. I won't tell you whether the ending was what I thought it would be or not. If you haven't read the book, you'll have to see for yourself. We got to see some characters from the original Alice in Wonderland stories reappear in here, but they were definitely their own take on those characters, and I really enjoyed that. The Mad Hatter was a big character. the Cheshire Cat showed up. Alice was mentioned, but she didn't appear in the book, and I just really enjoyed that, especially the Mad Hatter's character, whose name was Hatta, like Hatta, Hatta, super original. And I really enjoyed his storyline that Marissa Meyer created for him. I thought it was really unique, and I loved getting to see young Hatter before he was the Mad Hatter that you always see in these Alice in Wonderland adaptations. One thing that really enchanted me right from the beginning was how she offers absolutely no explanation for all of the Wonderland type things and the magic. She doesn't explain how it works or why things are the way they are or why animals are kind of like humans and dreams can become reality. She doesn't explain any of it, and I really liked that. It just kind of pulled you right into Wonderland, the Wonderland that you know, right away, and I really loved that. Those are all my non-spoilery thoughts for Heartless, so if you have not read this book, you should leave now so that you're not spoiled, then read the book, come back, and you can finish this video, because I'm going to get into some things, and you don't want to be spoiled for this book. It's one of those books that, like, you really don't want to be spoiled for the end. Don't stay any longer once I put this book on my bookshelf. You should go. Alright, what do I want to talk about first? The beginning of this book was a little bit slow for me. I was kind of pulled in right away by the characters, but it just didn't pick up for a little while. Once she meets Jest and the Jabberwocky starts to happen and all of that, it started to pick up for me. Kath's character was so frustrating. She's obviously not a very strong person. She had things that she wanted, and she was willing to go after them to some extent, but she wasn't really willing to stand up to her parents and say, this is what I want. She wasn't willing to put everything out on the line, to take risks. You know, it took a lot for her to finally say, I'm definitely not going to marry the king, and I want to be with Jess. Like, the whole time she was saying, I want to open this bakery, I don't want to marry the king. I was like, yes, but you're letting the king court you, and you're stringing him along, and you're not telling your parents. Ugh. It was so frustrating. And I think a big part of like everything that happened is the fact that Kath didn't have any good friends or any like mentor type characters. Her parents were somewhat loving towards her. They weren't terrible parents. They just weren't interested in what she really wanted. And there was a line at the end that really broke my heart. When they finally asked, does she really want to marry the king? And she said like, oh, the difference I would have made if you'd asked me that earlier. This book really like was so emotional for me. As soon as we meet Jest, I was totally sold. He was very swoon-worthy and romantic, and I thought he was wonderful. I loved like how clever he was, and all the performances he did were so intriguing. I thought he was too good for Kath, to be honest. But as soon as we met him, I figured he had to either break her heart, betray her in some really deep, scarring way, or he was going to die. Because we know that Kath becomes the Queen of Hearts, and the Queen of Hearts obviously is not a very happy, in-love person. So I was really glad when we found out like what it was that he was hiding from her, because I really didn't trust him for a while, even though he was, you know, lovely. I didn't trust him at all. He wasn't betraying her. I mean, he was in a sense because he was trying to steal her heart, but the fact that he wasn't playing with her emotions, he actually was falling in love with her. I was really happy about that, because if he had just been like stringing her along, that would have been so heartbroken. I absolutely loved the midnight tea party scene. That was one of my favorite scenes. I thought it was just like so cool and magical, and I loved meeting Hedda. Obviously, I really loved him. He was one of my favorite characters in the book. All of the magical hats, that was so cool. How they did something for each person, like made them more confident or made people think they were prettier or whatever. It was just really fun and whimsical. I really loved how Hatta, he stood up to Kath. He had a very specific opinion about her, and he was willing to tell her to her face. I liked that because no one really did that with Kath. Although I enjoyed Kath, and I don't blame her completely for everything that happened, she could have done with some guidance and some tough love, some advice. The whole time I just wanted to give her advice, and I really liked that Hatta did that. Not give her advice, but he was like, yeah, you're selfish. I thought that the twist at the end with Hatta actually being in love with Jest also was really great. I actually didn't see it coming, which I feel like I should have, but I really didn't see it coming, and it gave me a lot more insight into his character and the way that he acted towards Kath the entire book. The whole idea of the Mad Hatter like running from time, and that the insanity ran in his family, fit into Wonderland perfectly. That he was running from time, and like all of the mentions that they made of all the times that he went through and talked to those 3 creepy ladies and like saw the visions and all that. That was really interesting. I think Marissa Meyer did a really good job at capturing the whimsy and nonsensicalness of Wonderland. I enjoyed that a lot, but it wasn't too confusing, because when I read the actual Lewis Carroll Alice in Wonderland books years and years ago, they were definitely confusing. So it's always fun to read Alice in Wonderland retellings and get a little bit more like straightforward story. It was still very nonsensical and whimsical and didn't make perfect sense, as it shouldn't, because it's Wonderland. I liked having Cheshire show up also, but I felt like it was a little bit of a stretch. It didn't really make sense to me that he was like Kath's pet almost. Like, I didn't understand what he was doing there, but all the same, I enjoyed having him there. I liked how he was the busybody gossip. That was really funny. The poor king, I basically felt exactly towards the king as the characters did. He was sweet and amusing in a childlike way, but kind of annoying. I still sort of pitied him. I especially felt bad for him in the end. He got what he wanted, but it was definitely not what he was looking for. But he was sweet and well-meaning the whole time, even though he got on my nerves because he was getting in the middle of my ship, so obviously it was a little annoying. And I mean, he wasn't really the strong, kingly person you would want leading your country. The contrast, Jest being more like a king, not being nobility, and yet being very strong. And then the king being actually a king, and obviously like the highest status she could get would be for Kath to marry the king. And yet the king was a very weak man, and he didn't like stand up and do anything to stop the Jabberwocky and all of that. I thought that was interesting. It didn't feel like a plot twist to me. I didn't necessarily predict it, but just working for the White Queen and kind of being like undercover and trying to steal her heart. One, I really liked that idea of like stealing their heart and actually stealing their heart. It totally reminded me of Once Upon a Time. What exactly was this prophecy about Kath being the one to stop the war? Why did she have to be a queen? And did she fulfill that in some twisted way? How she could use the Vorpal sword, is that what it's called? Because isn't Alice the one who slays the Jabberwocky? Okay, here's the thing. This confused me a lot because I've seen so many adaptations of Alice in Wonderland, but it's been a really long time since I read the actual Lewis and Carroll books. So I was trying to fill in the gaps with what I know, but then I was like, was that the movie, the live action movie? Was that the book? I wish we'd gotten a little more information about Jest and Hatta working for the White Queen and what exactly that whole prophecy thing was, and if that got fulfilled somehow in some twisted way. The whole Peter Pumpkin Eater and his wife storyline was weird, but very Wonderland. That she was the Jabberwocky was really interesting. I saw it coming like halfway through the book. I didn't understand how she was the Jabberwocky and like how she got to that point. So that all being revealed was super interesting. How it was kind of Hatta's fault bringing those seeds, and she ate the pumpkin. She somehow turned into a Jabberwocky. Who knows? As soon as Kath and Jest had that little like kiss session in the clearing, like by the well after she got healed, I was like, all right, here it comes. Something really bad is going to happen now, because they're all too happy and it can't end like this, and there's still a lot of book left. And so, all right, now I know he's not going to break her heart. He's going to die. I was hoping so hard that I was wrong. That's why I wore this shirt today, Hopeless Romantic, because the whole time it was kind of obvious he was going to die, and that's how Kath's heart would be broken. And yet, I held on hope. I held on hope past all hope, even when he was dead and beheaded. I was like, maybe he'll come back. But no, that definitely didn't happen at all. It didn't matter that I knew it was all going to end in tragedy. I still shipped them because my little shipper's heart couldn't handle it. When he did actually die, the fact that I predicted it and knew it was coming did not make it any less heartbreaking. Yeah. Heartbreaking. I just couldn't believe it. Even though I was expecting it, I still couldn't believe it actually happened. I was kind of expecting things to not go how I was thinking they would. I thought maybe Kath would turn out to not be the Red Queen, and like her maid would turn out to be the Red Queen, or like something crazy. The fact that it ended exactly the way I thought it would was so jarring. The whole ending, Kath's heart being actually broken when it got ripped out, and her giving her heart up and marrying the king was just so painful. The last line being off with his head and her beheading Peter Pumpkin Eater was chilling and haunting. It was so good. I loved it. I loved that that was the last line. My one complaint, the one thing that I didn't like, is that it was so hopeless at the end. I understand why it was this way, because it's about the Queen of Hearts, and the Queen of Hearts is the villain, and she's kind of psycho. I understand. But in life, amidst the bad, there's always good that comes out of it. Even if it had nothing to do with Kath, there would have been some good somewhere that came out of all of this badness. There was none of that. Like, I looked for it. I tried. There was no hope that any of these characters had a better life afterwards. It didn't have to be the main characters. Although it was really haunting, chilling, heartbreaking, and I love those kind of tragic love stories. Like, don't get me wrong. I love sad books. Sometimes more than happy books. I really love sad endings. I just love crying my eyes out in books. So it's not the fact that it was sad, because I knew it was going to be sad. It's the fact that amidst all of the tragically romantic stuff that was good, there was no hope for anyone, for any kind of redemption in the whole story, and I just don't think that's realistic towards life. I would have liked there to be some good coming out of this somewhere, because I seriously couldn't find any, and I think that was my one issue with it. It's the reason I didn't give it 5 stars. That, and just the writing style is not my favorite. I feel like it's written a little bit younger than I enjoy. I like books that have young characters and young people could read, but are not like brought down to a young level, not written with young people in mind. the very last thing that I want to talk about is the Raven, because this was a really great part of this book. I loved it. There's a little author's note at the end, which if you didn't read, you should go give that a look because it's really interesting, super short, like 2 pages. She talks about the Raven, like Jest's Raven. I loved that we got an answer to why is a raven like a writing desk. That blew my mind. The fact that there was actually an answer and not just one, but 2 answers. I was like, my life has changed because I've always wondered if there was actually an answer, and apparently there is. There's multiple answers. Also, all of the references and nods to Edgar Allan Poe's The Raven that the author slipped in were really interesting and fun. I loved that. And then finally, the actual Raven becoming Kath's Raven and becoming the Red Queen's executioner. I thought that was a really interesting little twist. I don't know why. Those are all my thoughts on Heartless by Marissa Meyer. I really enjoyed this book. I also did write a review on Goodreads if you want to check that out, but I think I pretty much said everything in here that I said in there, but I'll link it down below. Let me know down below your thoughts on Heartless and what you liked, what you didn't like, if you agree with me, if you don't agree with me, whatever it is, let me know down below. I'd love to talk about it with you guys. I'm Miss Emma Reads a Lot on all my social media, which I will link down below as always. If you enjoyed, please hit the subscribe button. Thanks for watching, and I will see you guys on Friday with a new video.